I never thought I would live to see the day when my own son would look me in the eyes and claim that the money I had saved from my retirement was no longer mine. I remember standing in my small living room, the air heavy with silence, when I confronted him about the missing cash. My hands trembled, not from age, but from a fear I had never known before. He did not hesitate, did not show shame, only looked at me with a coldness that pierced deeper than any knife. Those words, so simple and so cruel, echoed in my ears like a bell announcing the end of an era. That was the moment my world cracked open. Until then, my days had been marked by routine, by quiet mornings filled with the smell of coffee and the comfort of my knitting. I had spent years building a modest but stable life, putting every coin aside to secure my future. My pension was not much, but it was enough to cover my medicine, the bills, and even the small gifts I loved to give my grandchildren on their birthdays. It represented sacrifice, discipline, and the reward of a life lived with dignity. That money was my safety net, my assurance that I would never have to depend on anyone. Or so I believed. I had always trusted my son. He was the one who used to bring me groceries when I felt too tired to walk to the market. He was the one I thought I could lean on in my old age, the one who would protect me, as I had protected him. I raised him alone after his father died, working long hours and often going without things I needed so that he could study and grow. The bond between us had always felt strong, unbreakable, until the day I opened my drawer and found the empty space where my savings had been. That emptiness was more than the absence of bills. It was the void of trust collapsing inside me. At first, I doubted myself. Maybe I had misplaced it. Maybe I had spent more than I remembered. I searched through my home, looking under mattresses, inside old envelopes, in places I knew the money had never been. Each corner I checked only deepened the pit in my stomach. I knew then that someone had taken it, and in my heart, I feared the truth before I spoke it aloud. I confronted him gently at first. I wanted to believe there was a misunderstanding, that he had borrowed it for an emergency and forgotten to tell me. But when I asked him, his face hardened. There was no apology, no explanation, only the blunt statement that broke my heart. He said the money was theirs now, as if my sacrifice, my years of work, my dignity, had no value. My knees felt weak, and for a moment I thought I might faint. The room was full of witnesses that day. My daughter-in-law stood behind him silent, but with a look that told me she knew. My grandchildren were playing nearby, unaware of the storm unfolding before their eyes. I felt trapped between love and betrayal, between the instinct to protect my family and the need to defend my own survival. How could my son, the boy I once rocked to sleep, speak to me with such cruelty? As his words sank in, I felt my breath tighten. It was not just about the money. It was about the respect that had been stolen from me. The bond of trust shattered in front of everyone. My heart pounded as if trying to escape my chest, while my mind raced back to all the nights I had gone hungry so he could eat. I thought of the shoes I had patched again and again, instead of buying new ones so that he could go to school. And now, in return, he was stripping me of the little security I had left. I remember the silence that followed. It was not the calm silence of peace, but the heavy silence of judgment and disbelief. No one dared to speak. My eyes searched the room for support, but all I found were lowered gazes and awkward fidgets. No one defended me. No one reminded him of the sacrifices I had made. In that moment, I felt utterly alone. But even in my pain, I refused to let tears fall. I would not give him the satisfaction of seeing me break. Instead, I clenched my fists, forced my voice to steady, and asked him why. Why would he do this to me? Why would he take the money I had spent decades building, the money that was meant for my old age, my medicines, my survival? His answer was simple and cruel. He said he needed it more than I did, and that I should be grateful it stayed in the family. Grateful! That word stung more than all the others. I was supposed to be grateful that my own son had stolen from me, that he had stripped away my dignity in front of the people I loved. My chest tightened, and I felt as if the air in the room was turning to stone. I could not understand how he had changed so much, how greed had taken root where love once lived. From that day on, I began to look at him differently. The man standing before me was no longer the boy I had raised, no longer the son I had trusted. He had become a stranger, someone capable of betrayal so deep it left scars I knew would never heal. My life, once steady and predictable, had been thrown into chaos. The stability I had clung to was gone, replaced by a storm of confusion and sorrow. Yet, even in that darkness, a small flame burned inside me. It was the flame of survival, the instinct that had carried me through years of hardship. I knew I could not let this be the end of my story. I had to find a way to reclaim what was mine, to fight for my dignity, even if it meant standing alone. I started to think of the long road ahead. How would I face the family gatherings now? How would I smile at my grandchildren knowing their father had betrayed me? How could I protect myself from further harm? Questions swirled in my head, each one heavier than the last. But one thing was certain. I would not surrender quietly. That night I barely slept. My bed felt cold, the silence of the house louder than any storm. Every creak of the wooden floor reminded me of the emptiness in my drawer. I stared at the ceiling, replaying the scene again and again, the words echoing in my ears like poison. I thought of ways to get the money back, but more than that, I thought of ways to protect my heart from breaking completely. As the days passed, I wore a mask of calm. I continued my routines, watered my plants, greeted my neighbors, and tried to smile at my grandchildren. But inside I was plotting. I knew it would not be easy, but I was determined to recover what was mine. I had fought too many battles in my life to let this one defeat me. My spirit, though bruised, was not broken. Slowly I began gathering information. I asked quiet questions, watched carefully, and searched for any sign of where the money had gone. Every clue was a thread, and I pulled at each one with patience and persistence. My son underestimated me. He thought my age had made me weak, that my silence meant acceptance. He was wrong. The journey ahead promised to be painful, but I reminded myself that I had survived worse. I had buried a husband, raised children alone, and endured poverty with dignity. This betrayal was deep, but it would not destroy me. If anything, it ignited a new determination inside me, one I had not felt in years. I held on to that fire as I prepared for what was to come. I did not know how long it would take or how many battles I would face, but I promised myself that I would not stop until I had reclaimed my security. I would fight for the respect that had been stolen, for the dignity that was mine by right. Each day became a test of patience, each moment an opportunity to stay strong. I told myself again and again that justice was not just a dream. It was a goal within reach if I refused to give up. My faith in family had been broken, but my faith in myself began to grow stronger with every step I took. And so, with my heart heavy but my will unshaken, I prepared for the long battle ahead. I knew that confronting the betrayal was only the beginning, and that the path to reclaiming my money and my dignity would demand every ounce of strength I had left. The story of how I would fight back was only just beginning, and I was ready to face it. The morning after that confrontation, I sat by the window with a cup of coffee that tasted bitter, no matter how much sugar I added. The house felt emptier than ever, as if even the walls had absorbed my pain. I could still hear his voice in my head, cold and dismissive, declaring that my pension money was his now. My heart carried a weight that words could barely describe. I knew I had to act, but the thought of fighting my own son tore me apart inside. Still, I reminded myself that survival had no room for hesitation. I began by checking every possible detail of my finances. I opened old notebooks where I had written down the exact amounts saved month after month. Each page was a reminder of sacrifices, of nights when I had skipped meals or chosen cheaper medicine just so that I could put something aside. Holding those notes in my trembling hands, I felt a renewed determination. This was not just money. This was my life's work, my shield against the vulnerability of old age. For days I kept my silence around him. I pretended not to know more than I did, but inside I was calculating, watching, listening. I noticed small things, like the new shoes he wore, the outings he suddenly had money for, the way his wife smiled with a satisfaction she did not bother to hide. Every sign confirmed that my pension had been treated like a prize they had won. My stomach twisted with each observation, but I kept my face calm. At night, I cried quietly, pressing the pillow against my mouth so no one could hear. My tears were not only for the money, but for the son I felt I had lost. He was supposed to be my protector, my pride. But he had turned into my greatest disappointment. I prayed silently, asking for strength, asking for clarity. I knew I had to find a way to recover, not just what was stolen, but also a sense of dignity that had been crushed. I decided to seek advice, but I had to be careful. In situations like this, family often sides with whoever speaks first, and I knew if I moved too soon, he would twist the story. So I confided in a trusted neighbor, a woman who had known me for decades. She listened as I poured out the story, her eyes wide with disbelief. She told me I had every right to fight back, that my age did not make me powerless, and that I could not let my silence become my prison. Her words gave me courage. Slowly, I started documenting everything. Every conversation, every strange purchase, every moment that hinted at where the money had gone. It became my secret project, my mission. I carried a small notebook in my apron pocket, writing quickly whenever I had a moment alone. It gave me a sense of control, a feeling that I was no longer just a victim, but someone preparing for justice. One evening, I found myself staring at the empty drawer where the money had once been. I touched the wood as if I could summon back the security it had given me. In that moment, I made a silent vow to myself. I would not stop until I had reclaimed what was mine. It was not about greed or revenge. It was about survival and respect. I had given my son everything, and now I had to give myself the courage to fight him. The days turned into weeks, and my health began to feel the strain. My body ached from the stress and sleep became rare. Yet every time fatigue threatened to win, I remembered the humiliation of that day, the coldness in his eyes, and it fueled me to keep going. I was not fighting for luxury. I was fighting to live with dignity, to face each day knowing I still had control over my own life. One afternoon, I overheard him on the phone. His voice was low, but I caught enough to understand. He was speaking about debts, about paying back loans with money that was never his. My heart pounded as I realized my savings had been swallowed by problems I never knew he had. It hurt to think he had chosen silence over honesty, theft over trust. But at the same time, it gave me the proof I needed. I went to the bank the next day, asking for every statement related to my account. The clerks looked at me with sympathy as they handed over the papers, and as I scanned the numbers, my hands shook. The withdrawals had been made systematically, bit by bit, until the account was drained. Each line was a stab, each number a reminder of betrayal. But it also gave me evidence, solid evidence, that this was not my imagination. Armed with those papers, I felt stronger. For the first time since it happened, I sensed the ground under my feet again. I began to research what options I had, visiting community offices and asking questions. People were kind, offering guidance, pointing me toward resources for elderly people facing financial abuse. The word stung, financial abuse. But I had to admit that was exactly what it was. Naming it gave me power. I did not tell him what I was doing. I kept my plans close to my chest, knowing that if he discovered them too early, he would try to stop me. Instead, I smiled at him when he came by, played the role of the tired old mother who had accepted her fate. Inside, however, I was sharpening my tools, gathering every piece of strength and evidence I could. I was preparing for a battle that would not only reclaim my savings, but redefine the boundaries of our relationship. The silence between us grew thicker. He no longer spoke to me with warmth, perhaps sensing that I was not as defeated as he thought. Sometimes I caught him glancing at me with suspicion, but I met his gaze without fear. He had underestimated me once, and I would not give him the chance to do it again. The tension in the house was heavy, but I carried it like armor. In my private moments, I wrestled with guilt. A mother should not have to fight her son. A mother should not have to think about courtrooms, lawyers, and legal battles. But then I reminded myself that it was he who had crossed the line, he who had taken what was not his. My role as a mother did not erase my right to defend myself. That thought became my anchor. I began to imagine what would happen once I got the money back. Would I be able to look at him the same way again? Would family dinners ever feel normal? Deep down, I knew the answer was no. Trust, once broken, could not be mended so easily. But I still had to try, for my own sake. The fight was not only for the money, but for the message it carried. That I was not to be underestimated, not to be disrespected. One evening, I sat at my kitchen table with all the documents spread out before me. My neighbor joined me, helping me organize the evidence into neat piles. As we worked, she reminded me that strength comes in many forms. I realized then that my strength was not loud or aggressive. It was steady, patient, and unyielding. That realization gave me peace. With each passing day, I grew more certain of my next steps. The time for silence was ending. I had prepared myself quietly, built my case carefully, and now I felt ready to move forward. The thought of confronting him again filled me with both fear and determination. But I knew there was no turning back. I could sense that a storm was brewing. The pieces were in place, the evidence gathered, and my resolve solidified. What began as a moment of despair was slowly transforming into a mission. My son thought he had silenced me, but what he really did was awaken a strength I did not know I still possessed. As I folded the papers and tucked them away, I looked around my modest home with new eyes. This was not just a house. It was my fortress, my place of resilience. And though my trust had been shattered, I was determined to rebuild, stronger and wiser. The battle was only beginning, and I was ready to take the next step toward reclaiming what was mine. The decision to take action weighed heavily on me, but once it was made, there was no turning back. I woke up each morning with a new sense of purpose, though the pain in my chest never fully went away. Every corner of my house reminded me of the betrayal. The armchair where he used to sit as a child with his toys, the kitchen table where we once shared meals filled with laughter, the hallway where his little footsteps once echoed. All those memories felt poisoned now, but I could not let nostalgia weaken me. This was no longer about what once was. It was about what had to be done. I started by making discreet visits to legal aid offices in the city. Walking into those buildings with their tall doors and cold hallways was intimidating. I felt small and out of place, but I held my head high. The people there listened with patience as I told my story, their expressions a mix of pity and outrage. They called it financial exploitation of the elderly. Hearing those words from strangers made the situation painfully real. Still, I felt relief in knowing there was a name for what I had suffered, and more importantly, that there were laws to protect me. The process was overwhelming at first. Forms to fill, statements to write, dates to remember. My hand shook as I wrote down details, forcing myself to recall the moment he looked at me and declared the money was his. Each word on the page was like reopening a wound, but I knew it had to be done. I reminded myself again and again that this was not about revenge. This was about survival. Without that money, I was vulnerable, stripped of independence in a world that already looked at me as fragile. I confided in no one else but my neighbor. She became my silent partner, walking with me when I had to meet with lawyers, helping me understand complicated words I had never seen before. Her loyalty became a lifeline. Together we whispered plans late at night, careful not to draw attention. My son still visited occasionally, his presence colder each time. I smiled at him politely, but inside I burned with the knowledge that I was building a case against him. The hardest part was the guilt that gnawed at me every night. I would lie awake wondering if I was betraying him as a mother. I asked myself if I was crossing a line by taking legal steps against my own flesh and blood. Then I remembered the emptiness of my drawer, the sound of his voice saying the money was his now, and the sharp pain in my chest reminded me why I was doing this. Love did not mean allowing myself to be destroyed. Weeks passed as I gathered strength and evidence. The bank confirmed the withdrawals were not made by me. Witnesses began to appear. People who had seen my son spending money recklessly. Neighbors who noticed new purchases arriving at his home. Piece by piece, the puzzle was forming, and I felt the walls of his deception closing in. For the first time, I allowed myself to believe I could win. Still, I kept my silence at home. I prepared meals, watered the plants, carried on with my routine as though nothing had changed. But behind that mask, I sharpened my determination. I could not afford to let him see the fire inside me. If he suspected, he might move faster, and I could not risk losing the fragile advantage I held. My battle was being fought in the shadows, and I needed to keep it that way until the right moment came. One evening, I found myself staring at old photographs of him as a boy, his small hands holding mine, his wide smile when he received his first bicycle, the way his eyes lit up at Christmas. Tears rolled down my cheeks as I whispered to those pictures, asking where that boy had gone. I wanted to believe he was still in there somewhere, buried beneath greed and pride, but I knew I could no longer wait for him to change. I had to change instead. The strain began to show on my face. Neighbors asked if I was feeling well, and I brushed off their concerns with a smile. Inside, I was exhausted, worn down by secrets and endless calculations. Yet every time I thought of giving up, I imagined myself without the money, depending on others for my medicine, living each day in fear of what would be taken from me next. That image terrified me more than the fight itself. I kept pushing forward. The lawyers advised patience, warning me that cases like mine were delicate. They said family could complicate everything, that emotions often clouded judgment. I nodded, pretending to understand, though inside I felt like screaming. Patience had carried me through many storms, but this one tested me more than any before. Each day of waiting was another day of humiliation, another reminder that the person I trusted most had turned against me. Despite the heaviness of the situation, a strange strength began to grow inside me. I realized I was no longer the passive woman who quietly endured. I had become a fighter again, like the young widow who once worked double shifts to keep her children fed. That fire had been buried under years of routine, but betrayal had rekindled it, and now nothing could put it out. My son started noticing something different about me. He asked once if I was hiding something, his eyes narrowing as though he could see the storm brewing inside. I smiled softly and told him, "Age makes you thoughtful." Nothing more. He smirked, dismissing me as if I were harmless. Inside, I felt satisfaction. Let him underestimate me. His arrogance would be his downfall. The day came when I was asked to provide a full testimony. Sitting in that office, I spoke clearly, recounting everything in detail. The officials listened, their pens moving quickly across papers. When I finished, one of them looked me in the eyes and said I had done the right thing. Those words felt like a hand lifting me from the depths of despair. For the first time, I allowed myself a small smile. Walking home that evening, I felt the weight of secrecy begin to lift. The fight was still far from over, but I was no longer alone. I had people on my side, people who believed me, people who saw the injustice clearly. That realization filled me with a strength I could not have imagined weeks earlier. As night fell, I prepared myself for what was to come. My son still had no idea how far I had gone. No idea that I was ready to face him, not only as a mother, but as a woman defending her rights. The silence between us was only the calm before the storm. I looked at the stars through my window, whispering a prayer for courage. I knew the next steps would be harder, that the closer I came to justice, the more resistance I would face. But I also knew that I was ready. My trust had been shattered, but my spirit was stronger than ever. The battle had moved from whispers to action, and the path ahead was beginning to reveal itself. Each day carried me closer to the confrontation I both dreaded and longed for. I could feel it approaching, like thunder rolling in the distance, warning of the storm that was about to break. And deep inside, I welcomed it. I was no longer afraid of the fight. I was afraid of what would happen if I stopped fighting. So I prepared myself, holding on to every fragment of courage, every drop of determination. The time for shadows was ending, and the moment to step into the open was near. The silence had been broken in secret rooms and whispered plans, but soon it would be broken in front of everyone. And when that day came, I knew I would stand tall, no matter the cost. The day I had been dreading finally arrived. My son came to visit. Unaware of the storm I had been preparing to unleash, I set the table with care, just as I had done countless times before. But inside my chest, my heart pounded with the weight of what was coming. I had all the papers, all the proof, neatly tucked inside a folder resting in the next room. I could no longer hide behind silence. My hands trembled, but it was not fear this time. It was the strength of a mother who had decided she would no longer be treated as weak. He sat down across from me, his face casual, almost smug. He spoke of small things, as though nothing had happened, as though my life had not been turned upside down by his betrayal. I listened quietly, letting him talk, my mind racing with the words I was about to speak. At last I interrupted him, my voice calm but steady. I told him I knew everything, that I had the bank records, the witnesses, the testimony written and signed. His smile faded. For a moment he tried to laugh it off, pretending it was all a misunderstanding. He said I was imagining things, that old age was making me confused. Those words cut deep. But instead of crumbling, I rose to my feet and placed the folder on the table. I opened it slowly, pulling out page after page, letting the evidence speak for itself. His face changed, the color draining, his eyes darting like a trapped animal. I had caught him in his own web. Silence filled the room, heavy and suffocating. I told him this was not about shame or anger. This was about survival. I explained how every coin I had saved came from nights of sacrifice, from years of hard work, from choosing his needs over my own. I reminded him of the times I went without food so he could eat, of the shoes I repaired over and over so he would not be mocked at school. Each word came out with the weight of truth he could not deny. At first he tried to argue, but his words stumbled. He blamed stress, he blamed debts, he even blamed his wife. I listened, but my resolve did not waver. For the first time in my life, I looked at my son, not as the boy I raised, but as the man who had stolen from me. My eyes locked on his, and I told him clearly that I would not allow him to strip me of dignity. If he thought I was weak, he was about to learn otherwise. The folder lay open between us, and the reality of what I had done sank in. He realized I had moved beyond begging or pleading. I had chosen to fight, and I had weapons stronger than his lies. He shifted uncomfortably, his arrogance melting into fear. The silence between us became a battlefield where I refused to retreat. I told him I had already taken the first steps legally, that the authorities knew my story, that I was no longer alone in this. His eyes widened, and for the first time he looked at me with something close to respect, or perhaps it was fear. He tried to speak, but his voice cracked. The man who had once declared the money was his now struggled to find words. My daughter-in-law entered the room then, her eyes narrowing as she saw the papers spread across the table. She tried to defend him, claiming it was a family matter, something that should never leave these walls. I turned to her calmly and told her that the day he stole from me, he had already destroyed the privacy of this family. I would not be silenced. My words were sharp, but they came from a place of clarity. I was done being quiet. The argument grew louder, their voices desperate, mine steady. I told them I did not care about their excuses, that the money was mine, earned with blood and tears, and I would reclaim it no matter how long it took. My daughter-in-law's face turned pale and she dragged him aside, whispering harshly. I watched them both unmoved. They thought they could manipulate me. But that time had passed. I demanded the money back, every coin, every note. He hesitated, but I pressed harder, showing him copies of the documents, reminding him of the consequences if this reached court. He knew I was not bluffing. The tension in the room was unbearable, but I stood firm, refusing to let the years of sacrifice be reduced to nothing. At last, he gave in, his shoulders slumping as though the weight of defeat had crushed him. He muttered promises, swore he would return what he had taken, though his tone lacked the warmth of sincerity. I knew this battle was not truly over, but it was the first time I had seen him step back. I had forced him to face me as more than just an old woman. He now saw me as someone who would fight until the end. I gathered the papers and tucked them back into the folder, my hands steady now. My heart still ached, but I felt stronger, as if a piece of myself long buried had been reborn. I looked at him one last time and told him this was his final chance. He could return the money and face me with some shred of decency, or he could watch as I took everything to court. His silence was answer enough. That night I sat alone in my room, staring at the folder by my side. I knew the road ahead would not be simple. Even if he returned the money, the bond between us had been scarred forever. But I also knew that I had crossed a line within myself. I was no longer afraid. I was no longer silent. As I lay in bed, I thought of the future. I thought of what I would do with the money once it was back in my hands. How I would protect it this time. How I would guard my independence with fierceness I never imagined I could possess. My body was tired, but my spirit burned with determination. The confrontation had opened wounds, but it had also given me strength. For the first time in a long time, I believed in my own power. And though my son had betrayed me, I was prepared to face whatever came next. The battle had shifted, and I was ready for the next chapter in this fight. The days after the confrontation were filled with tension that clung to every corner of my home. My son avoided me, his visits rare and cold. But I knew he was calculating, weighing his options, deciding whether to return the money or to fight me further. I carried on with my daily routines, but inside I lived with a storm that never quieted. The weight of betrayal was still heavy on my chest, but alongside it burned a fierce determination. I had not come this far to let him win. I began pressing harder. I called him frequently, reminding him of the documents I held, the steps already taken, the eyes now watching this case. He grew irritated, his responses shorter, his tone sharper. Yet I refused to retreat. I had carried him in my womb for 9 months, raised him for decades, and now I would carry this fight for as long as it took. His arrogance had silenced me once, but now it only fueled me further. Weeks passed before the first payment came. A small envelope appeared at my door, handed to me without a word. Inside were a few bills, far less than what was owed, but proof that he had broken. My hands shook as I counted the money, a mix of relief and fury running through me. He thought he could insult me again by returning only scraps, but he underestimated the fire he had lit in my soul. I confronted him once more, this time without hesitation. I reminded him that the law was on my side, that every missing coin had to be returned, and that my patience was running thin. His eyes flashed with anger, but beneath it I saw fear. He knew I was no longer bluffing. Each time he looked at me, he saw the folder, the evidence, the possibility of his shame becoming public. That fear was my weapon, and I used it without mercy. The payments began to trickle in, slow and uneven. Some weeks nothing came, other weeks small sums that barely made a dent. Each time I wrote it down in my notebook, recording every detail. It was exhausting work, chasing what was mine. But I knew that giving up would mean losing more than money. It would mean losing myself. I pushed forward, even when my body ached and sleep eluded me. The struggle began to affect my health. The stress pressed against my heart like a heavy stone. And some nights I lay awake staring at the ceiling, wondering how much longer I could endure. Yet every time fatigue whispered to me, I saw his face in my mind. That cold look when he told me the money was his. That memory gave me the strength to rise again. I had survived hunger, loneliness, and widowhood. I would survive this too. My neighbors began to notice the change in me. They said my eyes looked sharper, my posture stronger. I told them nothing of the battle I was fighting, but their kind words gave me courage. I realized then that strength was not always loud. Sometimes it was silent, steady, and relentless. That was the kind of strength I carried now. Months passed before the final envelope came. This time it was heavier. My hands trembled as I opened it, and tears filled my eyes as I saw the amount inside. Piece by piece, after endless struggle, I had recovered nearly all of my savings. It was not given with love, but with fear and obligation. Yet it was mine again. My pension, my lifeline, had returned to my hands, though the cost had been greater than I ever imagined. I sat alone that evening, counting each bill slowly, remembering the long road it had taken to bring them back. Every coin carried the weight of arguments, sleepless nights, and the endless ache of betrayal. It felt like victory, but it also felt like loss. The money was back, but the bond with my son had been destroyed. He visited soon after, standing at my doorway with a face that carried no apology. He spoke of debts and difficulties, of stress and mistakes, but never once did he say he was sorry. His words were empty, like ashes blown by the wind. I listened quietly, my heart numb. I realized then that forgiveness would not come easily, if it came at all. Some wounds run too deep. I made him sit at the table just as I had the day of our confrontation. I told him plainly that I had recovered my money, but something more valuable had been lost forever. Trust, respect, the invisible thread that bound us as mother and son. It had been severed. He looked at me with frustration, but I did not falter. I had said what needed to be said. The next day, I returned to the lawyer's office and made a decision that had been growing inside me since the beginning. I changed my will. With steady hands, I signed the papers that removed my son from my inheritance. It was the most painful decision of my life, but also the most necessary. A son who could steal from me while I was alive would not be rewarded when I was gone. Walking out of that office, I felt both lighter and heavier. Lighter because I had taken control of my future. Heavier because I had acknowledged a truth no mother wants to face. My son was no longer the boy I raised. He had chosen a different path, one where greed outweighed love, and I could not follow him there. The money was back, but I no longer saw it the same way. It was not just bills and coins. It was a symbol of survival, of resilience, of my refusal to be crushed by betrayal. Every time I touched it, I remembered the fight, the sleepless nights, the courage it had taken to reclaim it. It was proof that even in my old age, I was not powerless. That night, I sat by the window with my coffee watching the stars. The world felt both broken and whole. I had lost my son in one way, but I had found myself in another. I had discovered a strength that would carry me through whatever came next. The road had been cruel, but it had also revealed who I truly was. As I closed my eyes, I thought of the future. I knew challenges would still come, that loneliness would sometimes weigh on me. But I also knew I would never again be the woman who sat silently while others decided her fate. I had fought for what was mine, and I had won, though the scars would remain. The cost of recovery had been high, but in that cost lay a powerful lesson. I realized that love cannot exist without respect, and family cannot survive without trust. My son had broken both, and the consequence was one he would carry for the rest of his life. As I drifted into sleep, I knew the story was far from over. The money was back in my hands, but the decisions I had made would shape the future in ways none of us could yet see. The confrontation had passed. The recovery was complete, but a deeper storm was still waiting on the horizon. The morning after I changed my will, I woke with a strange mix of peace and sorrow. The papers were signed, the decision sealed, and there was no going back. My son had been removed from my inheritance, and for the first time I felt the full weight of that choice pressing on my chest. A mother is not supposed to disinherit her child, but I reminded myself that he had forced my hand. I had not abandoned him. He had abandoned me the moment he stole my future. I went about my daily routine slowly, each action heavy with reflection. As I watered the plants on my porch, I thought of the countless times I had dreamed of leaving behind something for my children, something that would remind them of my sacrifices and love. But now, instead of passing down comfort, I had passed down a warning. My legacy would no longer flow to him, but to those who had treated me with respect, no matter how distant the bloodline. When my son learned of my decision, the storm erupted. He arrived at my door one evening, his face flushed with anger, his fists clenched. He shouted that I had no right, that I was his mother, and it was his birthright to inherit what I had. His words struck the air like knives, but they no longer pierced me the way they once would have. I stood tall, looking into his furious eyes, and told him calmly that rights are earned, not stolen. He had made his choice, and now I had made mine. He called me cruel, ungrateful, even selfish. The irony of those words almost made me laugh, though my heart ached too deeply to find humor. I listened without flinching, letting his rage wash over me like a storm against stone. Each insult reminded me why I had taken this step, why I could not allow him to hold power over me even in death. For years I had lived believing family was sacred, but family without respect was nothing more than strangers sharing blood. My daughter-in-law joined him in his fury, her voice sharp, accusing me of dividing the family. I turned to her, steady and composed, and told her the truth. It was not I who had divided us, but the man she had married. Her face turned pale at my words, and she fell silent, perhaps realizing for the first time that no excuses could undo what had been done. The silence that followed was heavy, and for a moment, even my son could not find more words. They left that night in anger, their footsteps echoing like thunder as they stormed away. I stood by the window watching them disappear into the darkness, my heart heavy but unbroken. I knew then that the bond between us had been severed beyond repair. It hurt more than anything I had ever faced, but it also freed me. I no longer had to live in fear of what he might take from me. The inheritance was no longer his to claim, and the power was back in my hands. The following weeks brought whispers in the family. Some relatives sided with me, admiring my courage, while others criticized me, saying a mother should forgive no matter what. I listened to them all, but in my heart, I knew I had done what was necessary. Forgiveness may come one day, but trust never would, and without trust, there could be no inheritance. My decision was not born of hate, but of survival and self-respect. I began to feel lighter as the days went on. My savings, though hard-won, were safe again, and my future no longer rested in the hands of someone who had betrayed me. I started walking in the mornings, breathing in the fresh air, feeling my strength return. Each step was a reminder that life, even in its later years, could still be rebuilt. I was not finished yet. One afternoon, I visited the lawyer once more to confirm everything. The documents were final, stamped and sealed. My son's name was gone, erased from the pages that would determine my legacy. In its place were names of people who had shown kindness, neighbors who had supported me, charities that helped the elderly, and distant relatives who had treated me with respect. My legacy would live on, but not through him. Sitting in that office, I felt both sadness and pride. Sadness that my story had reached such a point, but pride that I had found the strength to protect myself. The lawyer told me I had done the right thing, that too many people in my position suffered in silence. His words echoed in my heart, giving me the courage to hold my head high. At night, I sometimes dreamed of the boy my son used to be, the child who ran to me with scraped knees, the young man who once promised to take care of me. Those dreams made me cry, but they also reminded me of how far we had fallen. Love had not been enough to stop his betrayal, and no amount of longing could bring back the child he once was. Still, I refused to let bitterness consume me. I chose instead to see this as a lesson, a reminder that strength comes not only from what we endure, but from the decisions we make when everything feels broken. I had chosen dignity over silence, respect over fear, and justice over blood ties. That was a choice I would never regret. My son's visits became less frequent, his words colder each time. I no longer begged for reconciliation, no longer hoped for apologies that would never come. Instead, I focused on myself, on rebuilding what he had tried to take away. My garden bloomed again, my mornings grew brighter, and though loneliness often sat beside me, I wore it like a cloak of honor. The decision to remove him from my will became a turning point in my life. It was not just about inheritance. It was about reclaiming my power, about proving to myself that I still had a voice. That voice had been silenced for too long, buried under years of sacrifice and obedience. Now it was free, and I intended to use it until my last breath. As the weeks passed, I noticed something remarkable. People in the community began to approach me, sharing their own stories of betrayal, of children who had taken advantage of aging parents. My courage gave them courage, and together we formed a quiet bond, a reminder that none of us were truly alone. My pain had become a source of strength not only for me but for others as well. One evening, I sat with my neighbor sipping tea as the sun set. She looked at me with kind eyes and told me she had never seen me so strong. I smiled, feeling the truth of her words. I was not the same woman I had been months ago. I was stronger, wiser, and ready for whatever life still had in store. The path had been painful, but every step led me closer to freedom. The money was recovered, the inheritance secured, and my voice restored. My son had lost more than wealth. He had lost the chance to honor the woman who gave him life. That was the final decision, and it was one he would have to live with for the rest of his days. As I looked out at the night sky, I felt a calm I had not known in years. The storm had passed, but the lessons remained. I knew the future would still hold challenges, but I also knew that I was no longer afraid. The final decision had been made, and with it, I had reclaimed my dignity and my peace. I never imagined that in the later years of my life I would have to fight my own son to protect what was mine. Yet here I stood, with the battle behind me, my inheritance secured, and my heart carrying both scars and strength. The journey had cost me dearly, but it had also awakened something I thought I had lost long ago. I had discovered that even in old age I could still stand tall, still raise my voice, and still decide my own destiny. That realization gave me a sense of freedom I had not felt in decades. The first mornings after everything was settled felt strange, almost too quiet. For months I had lived consumed by documents, visits to lawyers, whispered conversations, and the constant weight of betrayal. Now the silence in my home was not suffocating, but soothing. I opened the windows, let the fresh air in, and listened to the birds singing outside. For the first time in a long time, I allowed myself to breathe without fear. I began to rebuild my life slowly. The money I had fought so hard to recover was placed in a safe account, carefully managed to ensure it would last. I treated myself to small things I had denied for too long. A comfortable chair for my living room, better medicine, a few new dresses that made me feel alive again. Each purchase reminded me that the money was not just paper. It was the fruit of my labor, the proof of my survival. And now it was in my hands again. But it was not the material things that brought me peace. It was the knowledge that I had faced betrayal and had not allowed it to destroy me. I walked taller, spoke with more confidence, and carried myself with dignity wherever I went. Neighbors noticed the change, and when they asked, I simply told them that life had taught me to never underestimate my own strength. Their smiles, their words of encouragement filled me with warmth. My relationship with my son remained distant. He visited less often, and when he did, his words were short and his eyes cold. There were no apologies, no attempts to mend the broken bond. I accepted this painful truth, realizing that some wounds never close. But instead of mourning what I had lost, I chose to focus on what I had gained. I had reclaimed my independence, and that was worth more than his empty presence. The grandchildren still came to see me, their laughter filling the house with a light I thought I had lost forever. I did not burden them with the story of what had happened, but I treated them with the love and care that had always been my nature. Their hugs reminded me that even in the darkest storms, there are still reasons to smile, still reasons to keep fighting. I also found myself drawn to helping others. Stories began to reach me of elderly neighbors facing similar struggles, children taking advantage, families turning a blind eye. I realized my voice could be more than my own defense. It could be a beacon for others. So I began sharing my story quietly, not with bitterness, but with the determination to warn and encourage. I wanted others to know that silence is not the answer, and that age does not erase the right to dignity. With time, I discovered new sources of joy. I planted flowers in my garden, their colors bright against the morning sun. I started writing in a journal, pouring out my memories, my lessons, my victories, and my sorrows. Writing became a way to heal, a way to leave behind something more than money. It became my true inheritance, words of strength that one day others might read and draw courage from. At night, I often sat by the window with my coffee, looking up at the stars. I thought of the road behind me, the betrayal, the confrontation, the endless struggle to reclaim what was mine. Painful as it was, it had shaped me into the woman I had become. Stronger, wiser, unafraid. My heart still carried sadness, but it also carried pride. I had faced the unthinkable, and I had endured. I reflected on the meaning of family. Blood had betrayed me, but kindness had saved me. My neighbor's loyalty, the support of strangers, the laughter of my grandchildren. All of these reminded me that family is not only about blood. Family is about love, respect, and trust. And those were the values I chose to carry forward, no matter who stood by my side. There were nights when loneliness crept in, whispering doubts and regrets. But even then, I reminded myself that I was no longer the silent woman who let betrayal go unchallenged. I was the woman who had fought back, who had reclaimed her dignity, who had written her own ending. That truth gave me comfort. Even in the darkest hours, I no longer feared the future. I knew challenges would come. Illness, age, perhaps even deeper loneliness. But I also knew that I had the strength to face them. The fire inside me had been tested and proven unbreakable. I carried it proudly like a torch lighting the path ahead. My decision to remove my son from the inheritance was final, but it was also liberating. It reminded me that life is not about clinging to those who hurt us, but about protecting ourselves and honoring our own worth. I did not take joy in cutting him out, but I took peace in knowing that I had secured my future and sent a clear message. Love cannot survive without respect. As the seasons changed, so did I. My garden bloomed, my mornings grew brighter, and my nights more peaceful. I learned to smile again, not because the pain had vanished, but because I had chosen to live beyond it. Each day was a new beginning, a chance to reclaim joy in small, simple ways. Looking back, I realized that the betrayal, as painful as it was, had given me a gift. It had forced me to rediscover my strength, to demand respect, and to fight for myself when no one else would. It had shown me that even in the autumn of life, there are still battles worth fighting and victories worth celebrating. And so I embraced this new chapter, not with bitterness but with resilience, not with regret but with pride. My story was no longer one of loss, but of triumph. I had faced betrayal and emerged stronger. I had reclaimed not only my money but also my dignity, my independence, and my voice. This was not the ending I once imagined for myself, but it was the beginning of something greater. A new life built on courage and truth. A new identity forged in the fire of betrayal and reborn in the light of resilience. A new beginning where I stood unshaken, ready for whatever came next. In the end, my story is not only about betrayal, but about resilience, dignity, and the courage to stand up even when it hurts the most. I faced the unimaginable, fought for my future, and proved that age does not make us powerless. It makes us wiser and stronger. If my journey has touched your heart, I invite you to share your thoughts in the comments below to show me you stayed with me until the very end. Your words mean more than you know. And please, don't forget to give this video a like, subscribe to the channel, and hit the notification bell so you never miss another story like this one. Together, let's keep these voices alive.